Cool. I'm glad we got to come on. How's your day?
It's good. I finished working about an hour ago, and I'm ready to move into a weekend with my family. So
Yeah. Nice. And you work remote on Fridays, right?
it varies. We've got some flexibility.
Mm.
So I was on the road the last 2 days and decided to just work at home so I could be around my family today.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, dude, I'll just jump right into the topic of what you spent the last 27 years, correct?
Yep.
And that was in the FBI.
Yep.
So what years was that from? Back to the 90s?
So I processed my entry on duty with the FBI was August 20 of 1995.
Okay.
And then I retired on September 10 of 2022. So it was 27 years.
Wow. Wow. 1995. I learned that you could only be a special agent for 20 years. Is that correct?
So to get your retirement, to retire with a federal law enforcement retirement, you have to have at least 20 years of
Okay.
service. And generally speaking, you have to have at least 20 years of service and be 50 years of age. That's the
Okay.
general rule. There are some nuanced exceptions to that, but typically speaking, a guy's looking to get his 20 years and hit 50, and then he can retire.
Yeah.
Now, mandatory retirement at 57. So
Really?
without a waiver from the director of the FBI, once you hit 57, you must retire.
Wow. Even like clerical work, office?
No, just for the law enforcement, for the agent's
Oh, okay.
position. Yeah.
Wow. So did you start as an agent, or was it was seven, was, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I started as an FBI special agent.
Okay.
And not everyone starts that way, but I think when most people think of the FBI, that's probably what they think of as the
Yeah.
special agent position. So I started there, and then I continued working past the age of 50. And when I turned 55, I knew I just had 2 years left, and then they were going to say, "Hey, you're not allowed to come in here anymore
Really?
at 57."
Yeah.
So
You saw your way out personally.
I did. Yeah. Things kind of came together for another opportunity, and
Yeah.
I retired.
Yeah. So going back to the start, you mentioned in a previous conversation, you book at a standing FBI office.
Yeah.
Is
So
that,
what
is that protocol?
So what happens, Hayes, is there are roughly 56 FBI field offices around the United States, and those offices are in larger cities: Dallas, Denver, Los Angeles. And what happens is when you apply to the FBI, your application goes into an automated system, and what they do then is they process all of your application materials through the closest field office. So, for example, for me, at the time I was working as a trial attorney in Oklahoma City. So my application process ran through the Oklahoma City field office. They coordinated everything. They have an applicant coordinator in the office who works people through the application process, and then if you get to the FBI Academy at Quantico, you're sent from that field office to the FBI Academy. And when your academy training is over, you come back to where you lived before you went off to training, and they move you to wherever you've been assigned.
Oh, wow. Wow. In training in Quantico, that's where everyone goes to train?
Yes. Everyone who's going to be an agent, an FBI special agent, must complete the new agents training program at the FBI Academy at Quantico, Virginia.
And there's 56 offices. Do they send like a batch of people each year, like one time a year? And how many are in that class?
So when I came in, I think the year I came in 1995, as I recall, I think they put about 1,200 people through the FBI Academy that year. That was an atypical year. There was a large influx of agent hires that year. So what happens is when they get a class of new agents, and each class is around about 50 agents. When they get a class of new agents, what will happen during that training program is they'll assign people from that class to various field offices. So in my class, I went to Salt Lake City. There were other people in my class who went to Los Angeles and Boston and Miami and Dallas and Houston, Cleveland. No one really knows in the class why you get sent where they send you.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened when I came in, and the process is probably largely similar now. What happened when I came in is in your first week at the FBI Academy, they hand you a map of all the FBI field offices nationwide. And they say, look, rank these in order of where you'd like to go. And don't try to second guess the way it works. Like if you want to go to Seattle #1, then you better put Seattle #1.
Okay.
And so, I was very fortunate. I got my first choice. I put Salt Lake City #1, primarily because my wife and I knew that if we got sent to a satellite office off of one of the main offices, Salt Lake has got some unbelievable locations. There are offices in Missoula, Montana, Boise, Idaho, Billings, Montana, and I was sent to Billings, Montana.
Mm-hmm. I have a picture of what the FBI is based on like Criminal Minds and many other shows. And I'm sure you had a picture of it too going before. At what point in Academy did they tell you like, hey, this is what the FBI is? Was there ever a moment like that?
Yeah, there was never really a moment like that. What they're doing at the FBI Academy, and they'll tell you this when you're there, like, we're not really teaching you to be an FBI agent. There's too much to learn. And most of what you learn on the job. What they're teaching you at Quantico is how the FBI functions. What's our documentation system like? What do we document? What do we not document? How do you recruit confidential informants? How do you operate confidential informants? What are basic evidence gathering techniques? Hey, we're going to give you this gun that you're mandated to carry wherever you go. We need to make sure that you can qualify with it and that you're ready to carry it. And we're going to teach you techniques for, arresting people. I mean, there were times that our job involved taking folks into custody. And so there are ways the Bureau likes to do things. It's an organization that functions on tried and true methods, some of which come from outside the FBI. Some of them are developed in the FBI. And at Quantico, you learn a lot of those things. But in terms of the day-to-day work, like I didn't learn how to investigate a domestic terrorism case at Quantico. I learned how to document cases at Quantico. When I got to the field and I started working real cases, then I learned how to work real cases.
Like trial by fire. Once you're there, you learn.
Yeah. And you're assigned as a new agent to a veteran agent who spends a couple years kind of fostering your growth.
Yeah.
Helping you learn the job so that when you're off probation 2 years later, assuming you make it through probation, when you're off probation 2 years later, you're ready to go. Like you're ready to work pretty much on your own.
Yeah. What's probation? 2 years.
2 years.
Is it kind of just like a assisted program to keep you ready?
It's mainly to make sure that somebody is a good fit.
Okay.
And there are not a lot of people that don't make it through probation. The reality is the Bureau spends so much money to get you through the application process. And if you just think about the value of sending an agent to Quantico, where you live for, now it's close to 5 months. Like you live there 5 months, they board you, they feed you, they give you world-class law enforcement training. There's a lot of value in that. They don't want to just wash it out because they weren't careful about who they recruited.
Right.
So by the time you get through probation, it is a very rare occasion that somebody doesn't make it. And it's not because they're not careful about it. It's precisely because they've been careful to select the right people.
in the military, there's a term, I think it's failure to adapt. And it's like they get these guys out in basic, and it's like they keep trying, and you can just tell it's not going to work.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's really low with FBI.
It's really low, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. There's a bit of a difference between the two models, between the military model and the federal law enforcement model. Um, the FBI system is designed around the idea that when we get you, we're interested in you because you have experience. Like you have. So, for example, I believe to this day the reason why the Bureau selected me was because I had an undergraduate degree in accounting and a law degree, and had worked as a lawyer. Like the FBI has always had held in high regard accountants and attorneys.
Really?
And so that intersection, I think, really helped me.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not looking to hire people typically who are straight out of college and don't have work experience. They want professional people who have life experience, who've learned to work in the professional world, and are capable of doing professional activities.
Mm-hmm. So the military, that recruit high school graduates, 18-year-old guys who just have nothing else, or anyone
little
else.
Different. Although, there are a number of people that I knew in the Bureau who had come through the military pipeline into the Bureau. And those guys, like one of my good friends here in the area, he's a West Point graduate.
Yep.
And then he was an Army Ranger. Yep. And then from the Rangers, he ended up coming to the Bureau. So by and large, we're looking for a different season of person than the military typically would be. You couldn't take an 18-year-old fresh out of high school and assign him to FBI special agent work and expect them to excel. It would be too much. And the rules are set up so that to get into the FBI, you have to be, at least, I think it's either 23 or 24 years of age. So, and they want to see that you've met some requirements by then, like everyone has to have a bachelor's degree. And a large percentage of folks have master's degrees. Everyone has to have some level of work experience. And it doesn't mean that everybody has the same work experience, because they don't. Different people come through different backgrounds, and then, it's that collection of a ton of different backgrounds that I think makes the Bureau really strong.
Wow. Like a law degree. And then, like, what were some of the ranges of degrees you saw?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the first night that you arrive, so everyone reports to the FBI Academy. When you report to start your training, when I came in, everyone reported on Sunday night at 5:00. And so you show up and you put a suit on, and they take you to a classroom, and that classroom was our classroom for the entire time we were there. Every class we did that was classroom teaching, didactic teaching, was there. And then in that classroom, that first night, they make every person in the class, there are roughly 50 people to a class, they make each person stand up and discuss, introduce themselves, talk about where they're from, where they went to college, what their work experience is. And answer questions like, why are you here? Why did you choose to come to the FBI? Why did this interest you? And so that night I was stunned. We got done that night, and I went back to my room, and I called my wife, and I said, I don't know how I got selected. Like, the people that are here are very, very impressive. We had pilots. We had service academy graduates. We had a couple people who had literally left PhD programs to come. We had a guy who had a master's degree in aerospace engineering. We had a metallurgical engineer. We had electrical engineers. We had more engineers than any other background. And there were 7 of us who were lawyers. So it was really impressive. But I'll give you an example of why that large number of backgrounds is so important. So we go through periods of time where cases come up that are cases that are perfect cases for the FBI, larger cases, and so several years ago, we had a spree of anthrax letters that were sent nationwide. And so what would happen is, people would get a letter in the mail, and like most of us do, they'd just open anything that came to their mail, and they'd open the letter and pull it out. And when they pulled it out, there'd be a white powder that was put inside the mail, maybe in a beveled index card or something. And as they opened it, this white powder would spew out in their face. And in some cases, it was true anthrax. So people would inhale those anthrax particles, and it would kill them. Some folks died. Some folks it made very, very, very sick. Well, as this happened, we had those letters going to buildings on Capitol Hill. We had them going to businesses. We had them going to national level journalists. And to wrap our arms around what was happening, the Bureau leaned on its personnel who had specific training in biological sciences. I mean, I have a good friend who's an agent right now who has a PhD in microbiology. He was teaching at a medical school before he entered on duty as an FBI agent. And it's those backgrounds are important because in an investigation like that, for example, you needed agents who could go talk to university laboratory technical specialists about specific strains of anthrax and where they were coming from and how they could isolate them and know where they were coming from to work the investigation. So, a lawyer like me probably couldn't do that as well.
Right.
Okay. But a microbiology trained PhD level researcher who was an FBI agent, who knows the FBI and knows the science, could wrap their arms around those kinds of leads and interviews and make sense of them.
So it just marries up the law enforcement and
it does.
And the subject matter. Yeah. So your buddy, who was an aerospace engineer, he's doing FBI work and just waiting for a I don't know, there could be many things, but an incidents with airplanes or whatnot, right?
Probably not. Like for example, when I was in Billings, the Billings, Montana FBI office is part of the Salt Lake City Field Division, the Salt Lake City Field Office, which was responsible for Utah, Idaho, and Montana. And so I was on our SWAT team for a couple of years, the Salt Lake City FBI SWAT team.
Oh, wow.
And there was another guy I was on SWAT with who was a mechanical engineer by training and after he received his mechanical engineering degree, he went through officer candidate school for the Marine Corps.
Wow.
And learned to fly helicopters for the Marine Corps. Well, when he left the Marine Corps and came to the FBI, and he had this degree in mechanical engineering, they ended up assigning him to a bank robbery squad. Well, you might look at that and think, what a waste of intellect, but it's really not. What we're looking for is bright, motivated people who are willing to do what's asked. And so, even my friend who's the PhD in microbiology, if you talk to him about what he's doing today, he's not doing biology cases. Now, if we had a national level science case that came up and they needed his expertise, he'd go and he could figure it out. What we're looking for is motivated, bright, responsible people with good common sense and good judgment.
Wow. And that just happens to be the PhD level people,
Well, and I say I haven't worked for the FBI for a year.
Yeah.
But in my experience, in my 27 years there, that was my experience.
Wow. So they just have a wide variety of everybody.
They do.
And with dealing with the United States, how big it is, there's always going to be something popping up, right?
Yes, and worldwide. We have
Really?
offices all around the world. So, I had a friend who was assigned to an office in Nigeria before he came here. I had
Wow.
another friend who he speaks fluent Mandarin, and he was in Beijing for many years.
Hmm.
Um, there was a gal from my class, I think, that spent some time in Paris who spoke French. We have offices all over the world, not just here in the continental United States and in Hawaii and Alaska.
Do they operate through like the FBI, or is it like a shoot of the other nation's intelligence?
No,
Or
they're
not
they're
intelligence.
they're they're attached to the United States Embassy
Oh,
system.
okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And so upon graduating, you went to Montana. What was the assignment there? Why Montana?
Yeah. So at the time that I graduated, I didn't know what was happening. I viewed myself as this newly minted FBI special agent. And I remember thinking to myself when I graduated from the academy in December of 95, thinking, I can't believe this has happened. Like, I'm really an FBI. This is my dream. It's come true. And so Laura and I came back to Oklahoma City, and the movers came out and packed us up. The government moves you. And
That's kind of him.
yeah, yeah. Packed all our stuff in our little apartment up, and we headed up to Montana. And when I got up there, I remember walking into the Billings FBI office for the very first time, and there was just activity and commotion everywhere.
Mm.
And I was kind of taken aback by it. And I met my supervisor, who was a nice man. He was good to Laura and me. Actually went to our church. Kind of a quiet man. And he introduced me to the agent who was going to be the agent that was my training agent. And that agent was obviously extremely busy, and I didn't know it at the time, but at that time, the FBI was involved in a significant national level domestic terrorism investigation involving a sovereign citizen anti-government group called the Montana Freemen.
Hmm.
And that group at the time was involved in a lot of different types of criminal activity. The one that was creating the greatest amount of chaos was a bank fraud scheme that they were running. They were inviting people from all over the country to these classes they taught on a rural compound in Montana, teaching them a lot of white supremacist ideals. And then at the end of every class, all of these people typically came because they had significant debts that they couldn't get in front of. Tax debts, IRS debts. Some of them were in the process of losing their homes to foreclosure, significant medical bills, lots of liens. And what they were told is, if you'll sit through this class at the end of the last day, one of the Freeman leaders, a man named Leroy Schweitzer, will write you checks to pay off your debts. And what Leroy Schweitzer was doing was he was using a home computer. It was really a pretty crude operation if you consider the date, 1995, 94, 95, 96. He'd call each person back at the end of class and create checks for them on a home computer, print them out. The checks looked good. They went through a number of iterations over the years, and then these people would all travel home, and they'd send these checks out to their debtors to pay off their debts. And the checks were always for more than the amount of the debt, with a request that the debtor send them the overage.
Mm.
And so there were many banks that got stuck, especially on the early end of the scheme, before law enforcement and the financial system nationwide had a greater understanding of the scheme and how it was functioning. And so banks lost money on the front end. So that scheme is what generated the greatest degree of attention. And along with the scheme came a number of threats to local, county, state, and federal officials. I mean, the Freemen were actually printing color posters offering rewards, $1 million rewards to people if they would produce the body of federal judges and county level prosecutors and employees and law enforcement officers. So as that was happening, like I remember shortly after I got there, we received a phone call from a state patrol law enforcement officer in Lawton, Oklahoma, who had stopped a car. And when they arrested the occupants in the car, they found one of those wanted posters.
Jeez.
So you can think about, what might happen if some of these people took those posters seriously and started kidnapping people to deliver them for ransom. So when I arrived, we were in the middle of all that, and the FBI was doing a lot of very sophisticated electronic surveillance on the group. And I knew nothing about it. Like I said, Quantico doesn't teach you about that stuff. It teaches you how to draft a report. It teaches you how to testify in court.
Just the after end stuff,
Right.
Not how to handle.
Exactly.
Yep.
And so when I get there, things are going nutty. Everybody's running around, and I didn't know it, but the Bureau was sending agents from all of the Salt Lake City offices. Okay. And think about it. Like in Billings, we're 10 hours from Salt Lake City. So they were sending us agents from all over Montana, Idaho, and Utah. And we were getting agents from all over the country who were being sent to our office to work a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation in the Billings RA that typically had 7 to 10 agents assigned to it. And so when I arrived, that's happening, and I'm just stunned. I don't know what to make of it. And I asked my newly assigned training agent, I said, like, what's happening here? Can you explain this to me? And so he explains it to me, and he says that the group is operating out of Jordan. And, I've always been interested in foreign affairs, and I looked at him and I said, you mean the country of Jordan? And he said, no, Jordan, Montana, which was about 5 hours north of us in a very, very rural part of the state. And so the group had originally been in a small town about an hour north of Billings, and to gain more protection and to ensure their ability to avoid getting arrested, because they all knew they'd been indicted by the federal government, they moved from this small town north of Billings up to Jordan. And that was where we ended up having a standoff with them then several months down the road. And I was thrust into that. That was the first thing that I was assigned to. And when I arrived, I didn't even know that it was going on. I had no idea. What I also didn't know is that the case agent at the time was about to retire. And so they had 2 case agents assigned to the case, which is not normal. Typically, you have a singular case agent assigned to cases. Larger cases will get multiple case agents. There were 2 co-case agents on this case. The original, more senior of those 2 agents was looking to retire, and I didn't know it, but they were looking to develop another agent to come in to be the second case agent when he retired. And I didn't realize that there were 3 of us from my class sent to Billings, and I didn't know it at the time, but they were looking to take one of us and assign us to that case. And I ultimately ended up being the one they sent, which I wasn't real thrilled with in the beginning, because I joined the Bureau, I thought, to work bank robberies and kidnappings, and here I am working this big domestic terrorism case that I know nothing about. And I remember one day my supervisor had taken me to the United States Attorney's office to meet the United States Attorney right after I got there, and We're in her office talking, and while we're in her office, a bank gets robbed in town. And another agent came up and said to the supervisor, "Who do you want to send? The bank just got robbed. We've got people doing this and this and this, but who else do you want to send up there? We need to send people up there right now." And he named off the people he wanted to go, and it didn't include me. And I was like, man, I can't believe this. And so it epitomized the way I felt there in the beginning.
Right.
I felt like I was being left out, but I just didn't know that really what God had for me was this big case that was going to form the basis for an unbelievable career. I mean, that case ended up launching me into opportunities that lasted the entire 27 years I worked for the FBI. I got to see the country testifying in Freeman-related trials all over the United States. But at the time, I didn't know that was going to happen, and I was kind of bitter about it at first.
Wow. The Freemans.
Yeah, Montana Freeman is what they were called.
Montana Freeman. Yeah. Their operation, were they ever like armed? Like, I'm sure they were.
Yeah, they were armed, and during the standoff, they had guns. We did surveillance on them and watched them go back and forth from a vantage point they used to conduct surveillance on law enforcement. We had them surrounded, so they weren't going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
They were stuck there, and they did armed guard duty throughout the day and night each day, believing it would allow them to protect themselves from us coming to arrest them. Even though we had the property surrounded, and they actually carried firearms up there. And, we testified at trial about how some of the guns they carried up there, we determined through tool marks examinations on specific pieces of ammunition that had been extracted from rifles. Some of the pieces of ammunition, some of the cartridges they had loaded into the hunting rifles they took up to their guard duty posting were armor-piercing rounds. So they would have killed any agent they had shot, even agents who were behind, metal cover.
Right. It wasn't for hunting. It was for killing people. Yeah.
For killing people.
Yeah.
Thankfully, none of those shots were fired.
Okay.
And eventually it all ended with them surrendering and no shots being fired. But there was a time where we had real concerns about, whether they might do something with their weapons out of frustration that could get an agent or a local or state level law enforcement officer killed.
And you look at David Koresh and his group, that was just 2 years prior, right?
Yeah, it was just a couple years before that. And they were, this group was sympathetic to those, but by name, they were sympathetic to Koresh.
The Branch Davidians?
Yeah, the Branch Davidians and Randy Weaver. The situation with the ATF and the FBI and the Weaver location had occurred just within a couple years of our standoff happening too. Yeah. So, the standoff we had with the Freeman lasted 81 days. Mm-hmm. And the federal government had essentially evolved to a point where they said, look, we're not going to storm the property. There's no reason why we can't negotiate a resolution to this where people don't get hurt.
Yeah.
And indeed, that was what happened. You have to give our negotiation team credit for devising a system that resulted in those folks coming out without anyone being injured.
Yeah. I bet they took a lot of lessons from the Waco siege.
They did.
Because did. That started with 4 ATF agents being killed. I mean, that was just a horrible scenario.
And there were people, so again, think about where we were, in Billings, we were in the same FBI field division as Idaho. So that Ruby Ridge compound and the situation that had occurred there, many of the guys that I was working with, that I was on SWAT with, in fact, had been deployed to Ruby Ridge with the FBI Salt Lake City Division SWAT team. So for some of those people, that was a very raw moment for them. There were a lot of feelings about what had come out of Ruby Ridge, people being angry with the FBI. And the people I worked with were guys who'd been sent there to do a job, hadn't done anything wrong. And they were really frustrated by the reality that they went and did what they did, and people were angry with them just because they were there.
Yeah. So just the fact that it was resolved peacefully after 80 something days, that's
81
amazing.
days. Yeah, it was crazy how that happened.
Wow.
And then, of course, from that, you have all of the legal proceedings that ensue.
And that's where you stepped in.
Yeah.
They taught you how to do that?
I was, a large part of my role and my co-case agents' roles, we had agents, there was another FBI agent who was assigned as a case agent, who had actually been one of my training agents in the beginning. We had IRS agents who were case agents, IRS criminal investigation agents. We had state investigators who worked as case agents with us. It was a real collaborative process involving a lot of different agencies working together. And we were working with prosecutors from the Department of Justice in DC and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Montana. And getting ready for those trials was just a monumental effort. I mean, the first trial, I think, had 6 or 7 defendants, which is a lot. I mean, you think about 5 to 7 defendants all being in a courtroom together with their lawyers, okay, and how chaotic that could be. But then we moved on to the larger trial that had 15 people in the courtroom together, all with their lawyers. And some of the Freeman defendants were refusing to cooperate with their lawyers. So they weren't even in the courtroom. Their lawyers were representing them without them being in the courtroom. So imagine, a judge dealing with 15 defense attorneys, if you will, plus, a cadre of, 4 or 5 government's attorneys. I mean, it was a significant undertaking.
Wow. So it was like the work just got started at that point.
It was
to get the legal things.
Once everybody surrendered and they were arrested, we still had to search the compound, and we seized millions of pages of digital evidence and documentary evidence and firearms. I mean, that all had to be tested and examined. And then once it was examined, it had to be turned over to the defense so they could have a fair opportunity to review it for their clients. And then, you've got your normal series of pretrial hearings that happens, and then you try the case. Like, you get in the courtroom and you try the case. And the trials took weeks and weeks, and we did the smaller trial first of, I don't know, like 6 defendants. And most of those folks were convicted. There were a couple who were acquitted. And then we moved on to the larger trial with the larger group of defendants. And, we finished that trial, and there were hung verdicts by the jury. The jury couldn't reach a conclusion on some of those verdicts, about half of them. So we had to come back later and retry those counts. So there were 3 trials that ensued there in Billings involving our group of main defendants who had been involved largely in the standoff.
And so their scheme, was it to get people who were desperate, who had debt obligations, and then they brought them in and almost indoctrinated them, gave them fake checks to pay back those debts. So it just involved so many. One, you have the banks, and then what happened when those checks did they bounce? Like, were they determined to be fraud?
Yeah. So The banking system at that time didn't have the technological abilities it has now. So, there was more, for lack of a better term, there could be more float built into a check being presented and honored at a banking institution. So it was entirely possible, and what we saw happen repeatedly, for a check to be presented, one of the bogus checks to be presented. And if I showed you these checks, you'd be impressed.
Really?
Like, especially for 1994, 1995, you'd look at those checks and go, that looks real. And so if you consider the fact that these people were coming from all over the country, they'd take a check and present it to a bank in their area, which could be, Boston, Seattle. I testified in a trial in Miami. So those initial checks that get circulated there, people present a check, the bank would honor the check because it looked legitimate and pay off a debt. But what ended up happening, it wasn't just the debt being paid off, because the debt can be reinstated. Okay. The greater problem arose when the debt is paid off and then the bank follows the instructions of the person who submitted the check that, like, hey, I don't know exactly how much I owe, so here's a check, pay off whatever I owe, and then just send the overage to me. And so when the bank provided the overage to the customer, that's where a lot of your theft problem happened, because once that money is submitted to that person and they go use it for whatever they want to use it for, the debt can be reinstated. But once that money is gone, it's gone. You're not getting it back. And so that's where a lot of the theft occurred. And so what ended up happening was, after everyone surrendered, in the ensuing years, they needed my partner and I to fly around the country, essentially, to testify in all of these bank fraud trials. We had evidence that we had developed in our case that was very unique, that no one else had. We had the capability to identify people who had participated in the Freeman scheme, and these prosecutors nationwide could then subpoena us to come testify in their trials, and we could bring the evidence we had, and they used it then to try their defendants in each of those local jurisdictions.
So that's what bounced you around the whole country.
Yes.
Because those checks, they were centered in Montana, but then the people went back to their homes.
And what's crazy about this, is like, I go back to the initial bitterness I had about being assigned to this case. My supervisor called me into the office a couple months after I got there. And again, I didn't know that I was being groomed to be a second case agent on this case. I didn't know that. And he called me into his office one day and he said, let me make myself clear to you. You are not to work on anything other than the Montana Freeman case. Do you understand me? And I said, yes, sir, I understand you. And I thought, okay, well, I'll be a company guy and do what's asked, and I could not have known that over the next several years, I would have the honor of traveling around the country testifying in all of these trials as a lawyer who had practiced law, who had literally dreamed of what it would look like to testify in a trial as a witness with legal training. Like, I dreamed about that. What would that be like? How cool would that be? And then in the years later, that's what I got to do. I testified in trials in San Jose, California, and Boise, Idaho, and not just in Billings, but in Miami and in Iowa. I flew all over the country getting to do this, and it was a blast. It was so much fun. But it happened. It's clear that's what God wanted for me. He set that up in the beginning. I just couldn't have known that's what was coming.
Wow. You were like the most overqualified witness in all of history.
No, there are actually a lot of attorneys in the FBI. I was not the only one. We had a lot of lawyers. I just happened to be assigned to this case, and man, it was a fabulous. It was just a fantastic start to my career. I still can't believe that's what I got to do right out of the chute.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. And did your field officer, when he brought you in, was that statement about don't work on anything else? Was that because he knew a future you didn't know? Like,
he did.
Like, this is what you're doing. This is what you're here for right now.
He did. And what you have to understand is that while all of this stuff with the Freeman is happening, you've still, like, the office there was still responsible for 2 federal Indian reservations. Okay. The FBI in many areas of the country has primary jurisdiction over crimes, serious crimes on Indian reservations. So, you know, we still had to have people responding to rapes and homicides and child sexual assaults on the Indian reservations. We still had bank robberies, you know, like the story I told you. We still had bank fraud that was not related to the Freeman. You know, during the standoff, we had an FBI agent who was driving out to the location he was assigned on his particular shift that day up near Jordan, and he died in an auto accident. Well, someone has to work those. Okay. So there was a lot of regular FBI work that was going on that wasn't working the Montana Freeman case.
Right.
And what my supervisor was trying to tell me was, look, this is what we want you to do. Okay. We have other people in the office who are going to be doing those other things. This is where we want you right now. So don't go get wrapped up in other stuff, which was heartbreaking to me at first. I wanted to go do the other sexy stuff, but I could not have known what was coming.
It's like, there's a much higher, it's like, this is very singular. There's always this kind of stuff around the whole entire country.
Right.
Every day.
And then eventually, when the Freeman case was over and I'd testified in most of those trials, I needed a break from domestic terrorism, and I went into the new supervisor's office and said, I want to go work on the Indian reservation. Can you let me go down there? And he did. He assigned me to the Crow Indian Reservation for the next 2 years. Then I worked all violent crime and didn't work domestic terrorism anymore.
We all need our break with domestic terrorism.
Yeah.
There's a movie called Wind River. Have you heard of it?
I've heard of it. I've not watched it. People have told me I need to watch it. That reservation, the Wind River Reservation, is actually just a couple hours south of the reservation I worked.
Wow, it's fantastic. It's Elizabeth Olsen, I think, but she's like this inner city. She's really pumped, but she gets tasked out to Wind River, and there's one of the coolest scenes in any movie I've seen where they go out to the reservation and there's these security guards for an energy plant or something, and it's the reservation or it's the Wyoming cops and like the county sheriffs and whatnot, and they're in this big standoff, and she like steps up. She goes, "Everyone guns down. I'm the only one with jurisdiction here," and everyone's like, "Yeah, she's right. We gotta." And they all stand down, and it was just the coolest moment in that movie. But I didn't know that only the FBI. Is it just the FBI, or do they have like the chief?
It varies. Different regions of the country and different reservations have different systems for their law enforcement responses. You know, there are some areas of the country where the FBI doesn't have primary jurisdiction over the larger crimes that occur. Others they do. And a lot of those laws have changed recently. You know, Oklahoma, for example, has been in the headlines because there have been some very significant developments that have resulted in the FBI having responsibility over locations where crimes have occurred in the state of Oklahoma that previously were handled by, you know, the Tulsa Police Department, for example. So where I was located in Montana, there are a lot of Indian reservations that the FBI had primary responsibility for the higher felonies on. The one I worked was the Crow Indian Reservation. You know, we didn't work every crime that occurred there. You know, at one point I looked down at my ledger of cases and I think I had 50 open cases. And I believe that morning, as I looked, 40 of them were child sexual assault cases. And then there was, there were homicides and adult rapes, and sometimes there might be embezzlement and fraud allegations, but most all of it was violent crime.
Mm. Wow. And that's how long did you do the violent crime section?
I did that for 2 years, and then I transitioned over to, I worked on a large healthcare fraud case, a white collar case, and then I started doing online undercover work where I was posing as children, trying to arrest sexual predators. I did a lot of online child pornography work, and then I did a large insurance fraud case, and then I got to go to FBI headquarters, and I left Billings, and we moved to Washington, D.C., and things changed all over again. So.
Yeah. What's it like at the headquarters?
It's if I took you in the building, you'd be completely underimpressed by the structure.
Really?
It's dark. It seems impersonal. It's got thousands of people who work in it. It's got quite a history. I kind of enjoyed being there for the years I was there. I'd walk down the street and think, and I can't believe I'm working in Washington, D.C. On my lunch hour, I'd go for runs and, run the monuments,
Wow.
Run by the Vietnam Memorial and the World War II Memorial and the Lincoln Memorial. So there's a lot of cool history there. I just enjoyed the opportunity to go to headquarters. That was special for me. But that headquarters life, it's hard. At the time I left headquarters right toward the end, my wife was in graduate school, and she could not be at home in the evening. She had a heavy schedule. And so I needed to commute into the district every day, do my work, and then come home and get my kids in their after school program by 6:30. So I was typically leaving my house at 4:20 in the morning and then driving to a Metro line station, parking my car, getting on the first Metro line train out at 5 a.m., riding the train in, and I'd open the door to the unit where I worked at 5:30, and I'd leave at 3:30 each day and come home. You can only do that so long before your body just can't do it anymore. It was just so hard. And then I had the opportunity to come back here to Fayetteville. I'd gone to college in Siloam Springs at John Brown, and when they offered me the opportunity to come back here to Fayetteville, I couldn't believe I was hearing what I was hearing, and we jumped at it.
Yeah, especially with kids and wife in master school.
Yeah,
I want to have the opportunity to work in DC in any regard, but that I've always loved going there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. My kids, some of them don't remember it as much. We have 5 children, and when Laura was in graduate school, I needed to deal with the kids on the weekends so she could study. She was going to PA school at the time, and I would literally load up all 5 kids into our Suburban. We lived in Annapolis.
Okay.
And at the time, I don't know that you can do this anymore, but at the time, on weekends, FBI personnel assigned to the headquarters building, to the J. Edgar Hoover building, could drive in and park in the parking garage underneath the building on the weekends. Those are very coveted spaces during the week. They're assigned out, but during the weekends, most people weren't there. So I'd load my 5 kids up, put them in the Suburban. We'd drive down to the headquarters building, and I'd unload everybody, and we'd go to the big gymnasium inside, and there were ropes hanging down from the ceiling, and my kids would be in there climbing the ropes up to the top and getting all the basketballs out and rolling them out onto the floor. And we'd go run around on the mall and then have lunch at Potbelly's. And looking back, I've told the kids, I'm like, guys, I wish all of you could remember that on weekends, I took you to the Hoover building where you played.
That's incredible.
Like you ran around in the gym in the FBI headquarters building for a couple hours with me, and then we'd go play on the mall. You know, we'd throw a football out by the monuments or whatever. So, you know, it was an unbelievable experience for me and for my family. But now I live in Tawnytown, Arkansas, you know, and we have this life here that is just a dream. And to think that the Bureau brought me here is just beyond belief.
Wow, they've taken you, like, it seems like they've just taken you to glory.
Man, I'm blessed.
Yeah.
It's just, I still cannot believe that I got to do 27 years with the Bureau. And it's like, I had a youth pastor tell me one time, he said, look, the book of Ecclesiastes, in the book of Ecclesiastes, the author says that the man who loves his work is a blessed man. And I loved my work. Like, it went like that. It went that fast. The day I retired, I thought, I can't believe it's over. Wow. Like, it feels like it started yesterday. I had the opportunity to work my dream job. So if anyone ever tells you that you'll never find a job you really love, they're lying. I loved my job. It was a blast. I can't believe I got to do it.
Wow. One last thing before we run out of time. What was it like to have, did you have a badge?
I did.
You know, I love the scenes where they flash the badge, you know.
Yeah.
Say Federal Bureau Investigation. What was it like? When did you realize, like, man, I'm a defender of the United States of America? What was that honor? What did it feel like?
So the time that it probably hit me, where it really sunk in on a regular basis was, you know, when you'd go to a ball game with your kids, or, you know, where my wife and I are both University of Oklahoma grads, you know, we'd go to an OU football game and we'd sing the national anthem. Like, you're looking at the flag, and I would think to myself, you know, I would think of the occasions when I did things with my colleagues, my friends, where, you know, the stakes were really, really high. You know, I remember a particular occasion when we were going to arrest a guy in a rural area, and I'm driving down the road with another agent in a convoy of vehicles going to this cabin, thinking to myself, I just had this feeling that we were going to get in a shooting that day. And you don't stop. You know, you keep going. And so I felt like, you know, there was a lot on the line, and it was a huge privilege to be able to do that. I mean, every time I put that badge on, like, it was a big deal to me. It really meant a lot to me. And for years after I graduated from Quantico, I would look at myself in the mirror and think, man, I can't believe that this has happened. Mm-hmm. You know, it was a tremendous source of pride. And when you retire, they give you your badge. They drill a hole in it so you can't go around presenting it anymore. But they give you a mounted like shadow box that has your badge and your FBI credentials that you presented to people your entire career. They mount those for you and present them to you. And I have them on my desk where I work in my home office at home. And it's still just unbelievable to me that they were mine. I still can't believe I got to do it.
Wow. Sounds like an amazing time.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Wow. Well, Randy, that's all the time we got. Thank you so much for coming out here, man.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Really love this conversation.
Yeah.
All righty.